Well, hello there, everybody, and welcome to our Investment Friday. I'm Haunani Pao if you are new to User Experience Auckland, and I'm just one of the hosts here to talk about our subject this Friday. With me is Prae Songprasit. Am I saying that right, Prae?
That is very close. So it's Songprasit, but then you don't have to do the R. That's fine. It's close enough.
So, oh, thank you, thank you. No, I asked that. It's kind of funny, but I've known Prey since we worked together at a consulting company. It was what would you call that kind of a company? They did advertising and things like that. And I was doing UX there, and I think was that your first job out of class? I mean, out of uni or
Yeah,
something?
it's my first job as a software developer or a web developer in New Zealand.
Hi, Anna. So we used to just chat about a lot of things. I mean, I think that was her first job, and so I don't know half the things we talked about, but we probably just talked about work, or we talked about what was interesting, and we've always kept a friendship since then. It's usually we nerd out about things in the web, or we just catch up with each other's lives. I that's what happens in this industry when you make friends with people you work with. You care when they move to Wellington and away from you in Auckland because you don't see them. Um, with that said, this is going to be an interesting talk because it's not just a talking; it's about showing some work that Praise is hugely invested in. And it's going to be talking about we're looking at screen readers and things, but it's accessibility, and I think it's something that sometimes we may not really think about. By the way, Pray, one of the things that I did do when we started this event, is I asked the people some questions about how they um, are using, or like how they're gathering accessibility, or keeping in the know of the information. And there was a lot of great responses, dealing with accessing people or things online, or what kind of things they follow, what kind of and some even say, I'm not doing enough. So I think this is what's great about the opportunity of people to listen what's going on, is so that they can learn um, how to do it, but also just learn why it's important. Um, is there anything you want to take over and say some things and introduce yourself, please?
Well, I guess like a full introduction would be some part of the presentation, but it's interesting that you've collected that information. I'll be super keen to like discuss more about it towards the end. I was like after all the talk and see if any of the things in the presentation, I guess, answer or start like giving more ideas for people who answer those questions.
Okay. Yes, I do have it, and I'm happy to share some of the information that people had put forth. Yeah, no problem. Well, let's see what we got. It looks like we have about 30 people. If you want to just get started and get rolling into your talk, I'm going to go ahead and mute myself and take myself out.
Okay. So this is exciting because I've never used Discord. Sorry, I've never used this particular software setup to share my presentations before. So this is going to be very interesting. This is actually the most tech required I've ever had to use, I guess, I'm not even speaking correctly. Okay, exit full screen. Well, thanks for the floor, Nani. I'm guessing now we could see the first screen, which is cool. All right. So, kia ora, sawadee and hello. I guess I'm really happy to see that all 30 of you have joined us today to learn a little bit more about screen readers. And I guess like what we've chatted about earlier, in this session, I do hope that by the end of this 40 to 45 minutes talk, you'll have a better idea of how screen readers work. And hopefully, it will also inspire you to start thinking about ways to ensure that your designs does cater for this diverse group of users who use a screen reader. Okay, so I've been trying to make my talks ever more accessible, and watching a few, I was recommended that I should be verbally signposting my talk all the way through and also provide heads up to people as to how the talk is going to be structured. So here's what's happening today. I'm first going to introduce myself in full and explain why I'm here talking to you about screen readers. We're then going to have a look at what is a screen reader in a nutshell. We're going to look at who uses it, and then I'm going to give you a demo of how to use one of the many screen readers. This one is called OSX VoiceOver, which come pre-shipped with my Mac computer. Then I'm going to close off with a few key takeaways for you UXers to go and hopefully implement and test and use in your next piece of work. And then I guess we're going to flow into Q&A, and Nani's going to help me there. Okay, so first though, a little bit about me. I am a UX engineer who loves helping people create accessible web products. I am a host of Web Access Club, which is an accessibility podcast for us web creators, which is launching later this year. I've been in the New Zealand tech industry for about 8 years now, specializing in UI front-end development work. I have previously worked on large-scale websites like Tourism New Zealand and Xero Central, which is a customer help portal for Xero. In these projects, they've given me a lot of experience working with UX practitioners like yourselves. I have a deep appreciation for the craft, and I do owe a significant part of my 8-year career, all this growth that I've had, to the designers that I've worked with to solve all sorts of usability issues. In my free time, I practice Japanese archery and eat around town. I am a little bit of a foodie, so if you want to talk about food, let's do it after the call. In the last couple of years, I have started deep diving into the wonderful world of accessibility. Because in a way, I am a UI front-end dev, and my bread and butter is HTML. And in order to implement accessible web products, HTML plays a huge role in it. So by me deep diving and learning more about what I already know, I can, I guess, make sure that what I create with the team that I work with ensure that these things are usable by more people. And so that is why I'm here today talking to you. This year, I'm studying to become an internationally certified accessibility practitioner. It's a CAAP certification by the International Association of Accessibility Practitioners, IAAP. I will provide links if you're keen and curious about it later. But what all that actually means is that right now I'm no master at accessibility. This is a big disclaimer. There's so much I don't know yet, but I am committed to learning the craft, especially this year as I'm studying for the examination. And as we all know, the best way to solidify my learning, or everyone's learning, is to actually share it with other people, re-explain it in ways that might work better for other people. So who's better than my UX friends like yourselves? After all, you are front-end developers' partner in crime. For engineers to create the most accessible product possible, it takes everyone in the team, especially the UXers, to understand the different access needs. And as we progress through this talk, it will become increasingly clear that a lot of critical accessibility issues can be resolved much earlier at the UX design phase, but then implemented and driven home via proper front-end implementation. It's going to be fun. So what's up, right? What is a screen reader? What on earth is it? I mean, true to its name, It is an assistive technology, just like my glasses here, that helps me see the screen right now. It's a software that reads content and interfaces. It helps users who cannot look at the interface for whatever reason. It lets them access other software and the content inside that software. Now, I'm emphasizing that Screen Reader is a software that lets you access other software here, because as web creators, it is often easy to forget that assistive technologies aren't solely made for accessing the web. It is actually made for users to access anything on their device, anything on their phone or anything in their computer, their home machine. Your web app or web product just so happens to run in another software called a browser, and assistive technologies access the browser and reads from there. This is one of the reasons why currently there is actually no way to track who uses assistive technologies on your website. Browsers don't collect that kind of information, right? It doesn't know whether another software is interacting with it or is installed in the same machine. I mean, imagine Chrome doesn't always aware that you also have Firefox and Safari installed on your computer unless you set it as not a primary browser. It also doesn't know how you're using other browsers like Firefox and Safari if you have it installed. And why should Chrome knows it? Why should Safari know what you're doing in Chrome? That would be creepy, right? Apps passing information one to the other without you knowing. And then privacy's sake, that's actually quite scary. So that's why it's not happening. So when you look at it in that lens, this is why a browser does not understand if a screen reader, which is another software installed on your computer, is using like that browser. Now, as UX practitioners, the lack of data in this scenario will probably make you a little bit worried, but I actually wouldn't be worried about it, because if we truly follow the universal and inclusive design principles, screen reader is just another access need we need to consider as a part of our process when designing, thinking about the best possible user experience for our product. We shouldn't explicitly need to, states that, oh, yeah, we're going to make our product work for the 5% of users who might use X tool or the 70% of users who might use Safari. In the end, if you code your website well, or if you design your website for universal access and inclusion, then it should just work with assistive tools. Okay, well, now that we know what a screen reader kind of is in a nutshell, a software that lets you access content of another software, then who uses screen readers? When I first learned about screen readers, I thought that only those who are completely blind uses it. When I heard the word blind, I immediately visualized people who use a guide dog or use a stick to move around in the physical world. Man, that was such a wrong misconception about who are the audience or who the main users of screen readers. There are so many types of access needs that is helped by screen readers. And here are a few that I'm aware of. As I mentioned, many blind users use a screen reader. But it's important to note that people can be blind in all sorts of different ways. There is a spectrum. Some people are fully blind from birth, and some had sight and then lost their sight afterwards by accident, eye disease. It could happen to anyone, or by just aging. Some people are not completely blind either, but they are legally blind. What legally blind means is that they have partial use of their sight, but in the eye of the law, in order to drive a car or to function, they are too blind to be able to operate a car, for example, without some sort of tool, like without glasses or without, like any other tools that they can be using. These people who are legally blind, but still have partial use of their sight, could still see shapes and forms, but perhaps just, again, not well enough to drive or walk around without any guide. Now, some of these legally blind users could also have different visual impairments. Like they might be able to see perfectly fine, but they have tunnel vision where it looks like they could see through a little hole. Or it might look like they can see the things at their peripheral, but there's like a thing in the middle that blocks their vision. So they can't look at the middle of something. They have to read things from the side. So there's different types of blindness or visual impairments that we're looking at here, and they are benefit by using a screen reader. Next is perhaps not as common, but it's the neurodiverse group of users, which could include people with ADHD, with autism, and with other cognitively diverse attributes. They could also use screen readers to help consume information. And if you're wondering how, I mean, okay, when you were younger, you would have been read to or join a reading class at school while you all still have a book. You're reading the same text, but there's also an aspect of reading out loud, right? So imagine that. Like, why do we do that? Because as we're learning something, there's benefits in providing multiple ways to consume the same information. And that really aids learning. When you're reading the same text and hearing it read out loud, that just reinforces your memory and your cognition of what that line of text actually means. So even if the user could see, neurodiverse users could use a screen reader to also assist with their learning, assist with their information comprehension. The next crowd are the AI assistant users. And those users are pretty much general high-tech population like you and me. This may come as a surprise to you because we don't really think of tools like Alexa, Siri, Google Home as, as a screen reader. But a big part of how they function is acting as a screen reader. When you ask Siri to look up something online and it reads it out to you, that is functioning as a screen reader. It's reading information from an app or a website out to you. So now that we've seen that there are quite a few different types of people who benefit from a screen reader or could use it, this is like a classic curb cut case, right? So if you haven't heard of a curb cut effect, it's when you're walking down the street and you're on the footpath and you're trying to cross the road, you notice how the side of the road sort of like dips down, right? So that it's the same level as the street. And it also have little marks, little bumps, braille bumps to show like people, oh, please stop, this is an intersection. That dip in the footpath is called a curb cut. And it was initially designed for people with wheelchairs to cross over the street easily without tipping over. Because when the footpath is high, imagine trying to get your wheels over that. That is actually quite dangerous. So by making it flat, by making the bus kneel down to the street level, it gives a much safer way for wheelchair users to cross the street. But it also benefits other people, like mothers with a stroller or people on a bicycle crossing the street, or people who like delivery person wheeling things in and out. I mean, all these people benefit from an accessibility feature, and that's what we call a curb cut effect. Designing things that would work with a screen reader for people who do not look at the screen at all also benefits other types of people like the neurodiverse users and the AI assistant users. It just extends the benefit. And that is the heart of accessibility. You make sure that your product is completely accessible by a group with perhaps most restrictions or the most problem if you don't design for them. And by doing that, it will create a flow-on effect and affect other types of users too. Okay, well, enough accessibility basics, right? Let's actually have a play with a screen reader. So what I'm going to... Oh. That's interesting. Okay, technical difficulties, but never mind. All right, That's the presentation. Now we're going to have a look at how to use a screen reader. I'm going to use one of the websites and try navigating through it. But first, there's a setup. The screen reader called VoiceOver actually does come pre-shipped with your Mac. And you could actually find it by searching for it in Spotlight. So I just press Command Space just then to search for VoiceOver. So you could see here that there's a few options. You can go into VoiceOver Utilities, and it will give you a whole bunch of options to see, like to adjust the screen reader to your use case. Now, when I looked at a completely blind person who was seasoned user of screen reader, use a screen reader, they of course don't mute the speech. They have the speech showing. They adjust sounds like pronunciation, like you play with this a bit.
Daniel Compact. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
You can also adjust the rate.
Rate 37. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
A seasoned screen reader user would use
Rate
it.
100. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
Like when you watch a blind person use a screen reader, they go that fast and they're able to comprehend that kind of information. But for the purposes of this presentation, we're going to, keep it nice and slow. Maybe 52 is probably a good
Rate
amount.
52. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.
Cool.
Rate 52 วิธีที่ดีที่สุดในการทำนายอนาคตคือการสร้างสิ่งนั้นขึ้นมา
Yep. All right, so here's how to adjust the sound. You can get Irish accent, you can get South African accent as well. So go and have a play in your machine if you have anything like this installed. Now there's a mute speech, it's general, there's verbosity. What verbosity is how descriptive does a screen reader need to be. Now by default it is high because when you're learning to use a screen reader, you're not quite sure what are the commands or how to navigate the web and your computer with it. So we'll try to be helpful and explain, okay, like press Command Shift V or press these keys in order to access some of these buttons. So I'm leaving it on as default for now, but as you became a more seasoned user, you could adjust that to low so that it basically just reads information out and you'll remember how to navigate with it. You can also check navigation options and sound and all these other, go and have a play. So that's VoiceOver utility. Now, how do I turn a screen reader on, right? That's one of the, what I could actually do here is go to my settings and go to accessibility. And as you can see here, you would see a whole bunch of other accessibility features that you just weren't aware of. And what I'll do is that I would tick on this box to show accessibility status in menu bar. Because for us sighted users, sometimes I forget the keyboard shortcut to enable VoiceOver and other features. So I want a UI that would let me access that. And as you're learning it, having UI in an easily accessible place would also be very helpful. Right, so over here at the top of the menu, you will see that there is now a human icon, that's accessibility icon, and you could enable these features by clicking on them. So now I'm going to enable VoiceOver for you so that you can hear what it sounds like when you've turned it on.
VoiceOver on System Preferences. Accessibility window. Toolbar. You are currently on a toolbar. To interact with the items on this toolbar, press Control, Option, Shift, down arrow.
Now, with VoiceOver, it will only read things that it's focused on. You see the big black focus box. It will only read those things. Some assistive tools some screen readers like NVDA that can be installed for free on Windows computer actually reads out whatever you mouse over. So they would try to cater for people with partial sight and then mousing over areas and ask it to read to them as well. But with OSX VoiceOver, it doesn't do that. It only reads out the things that it's focused on. Now, when you're learning to use a screen reader, sometimes you just want it to stop talking, right? Like let's say you enter a different area.
Leaving toolbar, entering accessibility features table. Accessibility
you want it to
features.
stop, you
Table.
press Control. By pressing Control, it stops speaking, which is glorious. But if you wanted to resume speaking again, then you go, you use the VoiceOver command. When you're learning to use VoiceOver and you're reading like the Apple's guide online, you would commonly see this thing called VO plus A plus P plus L plus H. VO is actually customizable. VO is pretty much a VoiceOver command. By default, your computer or your Mac computer would set VoiceOver key as Control and Option key. And so in order for me to get it to start speaking again, I press VoiceOver key, Control Option, and an A.
Accessibility features. Table. Overview. Selected. Overview. Cell.
Okay,
Overview.
stop talking now. Cool. I press Control to stop it from speaking. Now, these are the two most important skills when you're learning screen readers, right? How to get it to start speaking and how to get it to stop speaking. You could also give it something like a control. So let's say...
Vision. Cell. Vision. You are currently on a text element inside of a cell.
Say you had enough of this particular bit that it's reading and you wanted to read the next bit. You use the VoiceOver key, so Control, Option, and then using your right and left arrow to navigate. So let's try that now.
Vision. VoiceOver. Zoom. You are display. You are currently on a cell.
You see that just then I have used the VoiceOver key in combination with my left-right arrow to force it to read the next thing that it could access. You could also specifically look for paragraphs and things as well, but we'll go into that in a little bit more detail. Okay, I'm going to close this up.
Chrome.
All right. So now we have a browser. Because
Chrome has new window.
Sometimes it doesn't quite listen to what I want it to do. All right. So since we're a web practitioner and I'm a front-end web developer, I will focus this talk on how to navigate websites using a screen reader. There are actually three ways to access, to use a screen reader on a browser. You can use a browse mode where the screen reader would read through every single content, everything that it can access on the page, unless you hide that from a screen reader using HTML. Another mode is called a focus mode, where you actually press Tab to select the next interactable item. So that includes links, inputs of all sorts, buttons. These are things that you could usually interact with, like forms, right? So that is focus mode, and you navigate to the next thing that you can interact with using Tab. I'll show you that in a minute. And then third, we have the rotor mode, which is like a shortcut in a way to let you navigate pages by headings, by list, by form controls. I'll show you that in a minute as well. All right, let's have a play with the W3C website. Now I'm using the W3C website because it is the World Wide Web Consortium website, the people who create and set the web standards. So I'd hope that their website is coded in the most semantically correct HTML way possible and designed in a way that would let assistive tool like a screen reader access it easily. So, okay, let's have a play. I'm going to tab in.
Entering World Wide Web Consortium, W3C.
See, the interesting thing is as soon as I tab, the skip link appeared on the right-hand side. Now, the location of the skip link can be anywhere, right? It could be top left, top right. This is up to you, UXers, to decide where the positioning of that should be. But skip link should be the very first thing that a keyboard user can use to get access to. Because often a screen reader user cannot see the screen. So they can't really use a mouse, or many of them can't. The way for them to navigate content in your website is to use a keyboard. That is why keyboard navigation is super important when you're designing for any assistive tech or any access needs user. Because if your site can be navigated by keyboard, that is majority of the battle in terms of interaction. And a mouse is like a nice to have. So again, don't focus on designing mouse interaction, focus on designing keyboard interaction, and then mouse would follow naturally. All right, back to the skip link. I said skip should be the first thing that shows up in the page. And why is that? That is because if I'm tabbing through this whole site, the first thing that usually comes up is a navigation, right? Heading, navigation, item. And imagine if you have a site with 500 navigation item at the top, like Amazon, shopping, all the time. If you are a keyboard only user and you're tabbing through all those items, oh my goodness, when are you going to get to the main content? I've just landed on a shopping page for perhaps a bag, but I had to tab through all the 500 navigation items in order to get to a bag. And that is where skip link comes in. Because as soon as I hit enter, I'm now skipped to the main content of the page. I've skipped all that header and repeated information that is not really the main focus of the page to the main focus of the page. All right, let's try letting it read the next thing in the page.
Heading level 2, news. You are currently on a heading level 2, inside of web content. To exit this web area, press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow.
So to be a note here is that this instruction to press Control, Option, Shift, up arrow is actually for navigating around web apps. In browsers, when you're navigating around, it is a little bit simpler to do. So when you're learning to use a screen reader with a website, I would actually ignore that instructions a bit and have open perhaps a few cheat sheet that I can share with you afterwards as well, so that it helps you navigate. But for now, that's not really a focus. Ignore that instruction to go Control, Option, Shift for now. But the key here is that I want you to hear what is actually being read out and match the visuals with the sound.
Heading level 2, news. Heading level 3, link. Collapsed W3C TPAC 2022 will be a hybrid meeting. 2022 to 2004 11t 15 hours, 33 minutes, and 36 seconds Z group. The 11th of April, 2022. Link. Archive. Link. Image. TPAC generic logo.
Okay, I've stopped now. So that I've enabled the browse mode to just read whatever's on there right now using, again, the VoiceOver key plus A, reading all. So that's how to use the browse mode. It will just basically read everything in that section in order. So this order is actually not determined by CSS and HTML, by CSS or by any visual styling. The order of what screen reader read first is determined by the HTML code behind the scene. So let's say you come to a web page, right? And your front-end developer decided that, okay, this thing here is going to now be positioned on the right-hand side, this logo. But from a UX perspective, if you feel that that is very important and that should be read out first, you specify to a front-end developer saying, look, I know this logo is styled on the right-hand side of the screen, but it should be read first. In that case, front-end developer would code it so that, okay, cool, this heading, code his heading first, code the date, code the archive link, code the logo, and then followed by text content. And that is how we determined the order in which screen reader should read. But of course, it is a best practice recommendation for web application standards to actually match the visual order with the programmatic or the HTML order, because you can't always assume that you can't always assume that a user is completely blind or not blind. Imagine if the user is only partially blind and using a screen reader and some information is on the right-hand side visually, but the screen reader reads it last or read it first in an order that the user did not expect. That's actually bad UX. So when you're designing the experience, you should be designing experience in a very linear way. What should be very first information user encounter, the second information user encounter, the next one, and list it down, design it as if it's linear, and then, and only you're happy with that flow, then you turn into a visual thing where you have left, right, small, medium, large, So like that's actually a full argument for going content first, right, with your design. All right, so we've done with the browse mode. Let's actually try another mode, which is called a focus mode.
Link. Expand WebAssembly 2.0 first public web.
You see here, as soon as I pressed tab just then, it skipped all the other content straight to this thing here, this thing called WebAssembly 2.0 first public working draft, because that is a link or a button. It is, well, I mean, it did say, right, link expanded WebAssembly 2.0, because link is a next interactable item on this page. If I tab again,
link, archive, link, expand working group note, fonts for the web, rationale, 1996. You are currently on.
Okay, so now that I'm focused on here, how do you enter this information, right? Like, how do you get into this information or act upon the link? You could usually, if you're using a keyboard, there's two ways to confirm something. It's either a space or an enter in order to confirm selection. Now, if you're using a button, a space would be sufficient most of the time. A space is like, okay, open that option key, open that button. But you can also press enter and it will take you to a new page. Now let's try that. I'm going to try pressing enter and see what happens.
Collapse working group note, fonts for the web, rationale, 1996. You are currently on a heading level 3.
So just then it read collapse working group and then announced what it is. So that is a very normal way screen to announce things for specifically OSX VoiceOver here. It will announce what is the type of content you're experiencing, and then reads out the text or what it's called, the name of this action. If you encounter link, it will say link and what this link is called. Encounter collapsed state, it would say what is being collapsed here. So that's like kind of the way that you're navigating. So if I want to collapse this again, I think I'll probably press enter again.
Expand working group note, fonts for the web, rationale, 1996.
Okay, cool. So as soon as I enter to confirm that I want to collapse it, it then reads out the current status of this link, which is saying, yes, this link has ability to expand, and you can expand this by XYZ. So that's an interesting way to do it. Now, another way to navigate, right? Like we've gone through browse, we've gone through focus. Now I'm going to show you how to use a mode called rotor. And this is like, it gives you an insight as to how people who perhaps cannot see can quickly use screen reader to skim through content of the site. Because when you're a sighted user, you could just quickly go, all right, W3C, like, in about 2 seconds, you can get a general idea of the web content. That's how you're using your eyes to quickly scan through the content. But how does a blind user do that? The quick scanning, right? Well, that's what keyboard shortcuts in the screen reader is for. You could enable, I'm going to
links menu.
So this is called the rotor mode. I use Control Alt, so VoiceOver key, and a U. U is in like university U. And it shows me the options or all the links possible on the page.
Visited, link, 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 membership, link, about W3C, link, web for all header link, visited, link, link, internationalization, link, web security.
Yep, so it's, you remember that when you're, when you go to a content accessibility training session, the person who's training you will be really focused on making sure that you name your link in a very descriptive way and preferably unique to the page. And this is why, because one of the ways a screen reader users could quickly browse the content of your page is via what are all the links available on this page. And imagine if you are an e-commerce site and you have, carrots and tomatoes and all those things on the page, and you have a call to action item to like quick shop or quick buy or put in basket. And those buttons from the UI perspective will look the same, right? It will say add to basket, add to basket, add to basket. If all of those are links or button and they all have a name of add to basket, this link list will be full of 40 add to baskets. But people don't know what are you adding to basket. It's not descriptive enough. So this is where designing an experience in a text first and content first way, you also, if you're thinking, okay, cool, it's an e-commerce site, I've written all the list item in order. I've now written, okay, user encounter an item that they can purchase. I wanted to read buy carrot, buy 5 carrots, buy like whatever it is, right? By writing that down, be descriptive, a front-end developer like myself could go, all right, cool, I know the visuals. It's just going to say shop now or add to cart. But when I code, I would code the name of the item into the button as well. So visually, I can't see the word carrot in the button, but the button itself is named add carrot to cart, which is super useful. And that gives it a unique button interaction or unique link. And that is very helpful for people trying to quickly find things on your page to navigate through. So that's navigating by link. If I press right arrow,
Headings menu.
it will show
Chrome
you,
has new window.
it will show me all the headings on the page. Now, navigating by heading is also one of the most common way a screen reader user navigate the page. And it is useful because, again, imagine you're trying to look up information about COVID information on the website. You first land on a website about COVID information, and this is a one-page website that has every single information, like how many cases, what's vaccination status like. It has all sorts of things on the page. And so a screen reader user could navigate by heading and go, okay, I want to show me all the heading 2s, heading 1, heading 4 of this website. So I get a glimpse, an idea as to what this page has to offer for me. And let's say if there is no heading at all, the website might have a visual style of a heading 1, 2, 3, 4, but it's not coded with heading 1, heading 2, heading 3. Everything is paragraphs. The blind user would come in here and go, oh, yep, there's no headings on this page, and so I can't quickly browse through this content, or maybe this content doesn't have information that I need, and I'll skip over and try some other site. And that is detrimental to your design, right? Because even if you design the best possible visuals of a way to implement, way to present certain information, but if you don't specify which of these information have a heading and which one is a list and which one is an article bit, then the screen reader users using rotor or quick ways to navigate the site just can't see. And as you see here in the W3 website, heading 1 is W3C. That's the first thing that's right on the page. Heading 2 is site navigation. And then in order, it says heading 3. So as a person who's trying to understand the structure of this page very quickly, I would interpret as site navigation, web for all. And so web for all is under site navigation. Web and industry is also a heading 3, so it's also a part of the section called site navigation. In the section called news, because everything's under heading 2, there's heading 3 underneath it. So news about collapse W3 CTPA 2021. News about WebAssembly 2.0. News about working group node. You see how important it is to make sure that your page has heading 1, 2, and 3 nested and structured in a chronological order. It doesn't matter what the visuals say, but your code and the way you structure your content needs to be specific and be linear in order. Because imagine if you don't have heading 2, site navigation, WebAssembly 2.1. So when I get to WebAssembly 2.1 and I hit enter, I would assume that this is a navigation item, but it is not. And that would be a problem, right? So as a UX person, when you've designed your content or your interface or experience in a linear format, you then go, you have a chance to look at your content and go, this is definitely a group of content. It should have appropriate heading levels inside it. And then when you hand that over to the developers to work, that is so much easier for us to work and code with. We want visual information from your Figma file, from your Adobe XD and all that stuff, but we also want like, what should the structure of the page be? By you being specific and being mindful about what you want the users who navigate the page linearly to see and to hear, you are being very helpful to the developers who are going to have to be, implementing your final design, and make sure that your designs are implemented in the most accessible way possible. When you don't specify this sort of thing, it is then up to the developer to sort of envision, all right, I think that's a heading 2, and then they'll code accordingly. But more often than not, in this age of like JavaScript third code or full stack devs also do front end, they probably don't know the importance of having different heading levels like this. And so they'll just code everything in a div or in a span or in p tag, which is not useful. Anyway, back to the rotor.
Form controls menu.
So I press arrow key again to go to the next way that I can navigate the site using a rotor. Form controls actually would list out all the things that are form elements. So that's button, input, select box. Like imagine filling in like contact form and things like that. It would say the form name. So that's why it's really important for an input field like this one to have a label. Even if it's not visible, it still needs to be coded in and related to the input field. So when you're designing a contact form, make sure that you at least write out what the label should be called so that developers can then go and code that up, regardless of whether there's a visible or not visible label. But again, like I'm on a camp that you should always have a visible label, unless it's like, a very obvious thing like a search box. But even so, this here shows that W3C has coded the site correctly. It coded a name of the input field onto here. So search edit text, it shows that this text field is editable. Search button group. Actually, where is search button group? I'm going to try it out.
Edit text. Search button group.
Okay. So basically, search button group is the search button that is inside or related to the search.
Chrome has new window. No items in landmarks menu.
Cool. Landmarks a bit tricky because there's not many examples that use it properly. So hopefully in the next site that I can quickly show you, it would have some sort of landmarks that we could piggyback off.
Text fields menu.
Okay. So let's try it on the real site.
NZ News. Current.
This is a real site, and
no items in text fields menu. World Wide Web Consortium. W3C. Web content.
Okay, hang on. Let me refresh the page just so that.
Website web content. You are currently on a banner inside of web content.
Okay, cool. So it's interesting that as soon as we land on RNZ and I press the next key, it started reading that I'm on a banner. And so a banner could also be a nav. And so that's fine. It just means I've coded it correctly. So I'm going to try tabbing through to the next interactable item.
Visited link. Return to RNZ homepage. Website web content busy. Visited link. Skip to content. Navigation. Access key available.
Okay, cool. So you see that it's visually hidden, but there exists a skip link where a keyboard user like myself could quickly skip to the main content. So press tab again.
Link. Watch. PM on NZ Street.
It takes me straight to the next thing inside the main area that I've been skipped to, which means this is coded correctly. And that tab again.
Link. Politics. Link. World. Link. New Zealand and Japan Prime Ministers. Link. Ardern celebrates green energy and kiwi fruit in Tokyo. You are currently on.
Okay, so let's say I'm on RNZ to search for news about perhaps the latest missing girl that has been on the news lately. So how do I quickly get to that information? Well, I could use the rotor, or I could also use a shortcut key that lets me navigate by link, heading, form control, list, and table. So instead of opening up that UI rotor, because, let's say I'm an expert user and I know how to use the shortcut keys now, I would use the VoiceOver key and then Command and then H.
Heading level 3, link. Man named as formal
to navigate by headings. So as soon as I navigate by heading, it will navigate to the next heading that is coded correctly as a heading. You see that as soon as I press heading just then, it navigates to the man named formal suspect in Madeleine McCain case. So that's probably a news that I was looking for just then. I will navigate into it.
List 3 items. Heading level 3, link. Man named as formal suspect in Madeleine McCann case. 1 of 3. You are currently on a heading level 3.
Interesting.
Link. Man named as formal suspect in Madeleine McCann case.
Okay, so what happened just then was that I navigated to this heading using the shortcut key to navigate to heading, and it reads it out, but it is not yet a link. So I have to press tab to switch to a focus mode so that I can enter into the link that is probably nested inside this heading before I could actually enter to the next page.
Website web.
Okay, so now because I got to the link, I can finally press enter. So that's one of those things that you have to work closely with the front-end developer in your team. Is that a desirable thing of user entering a heading, need to tab into link to auto access it? Like, how do we provide the most optimal browsing experience for your product? So for new site, this might be intentional. There might be a reason why they kept this separate and they don't, like add any more controls or any more manipulation of shortcuts to do that. They just use whatever's on the browser. And the default browser is, if a link is nested inside a heading, it will be two separate things. You need to press tab not to get there. So being aware of what a browser default interaction for any of these elements is using a screen reader is also very important. You look at the browser default and go, what does it expect users to do in order to interact with me? When you understand that keyboard interaction, and when you work on your design, you can then be descriptive, right? Let's say you're designing a whole new element, a new app UI that would let you quickly create a checklist or delete checklist, or marking something as done. You could, if you're following a browser default, there's quite a lot of keys you need to do in order to like tick something or to enter or to select something. You could then, as a UXer, then work closely with the front-end dev to design, all right, how do we optimize the browser default expectation that the user who used the website would have, but give them additional oomph, to get additional way to make it more efficient for them without overriding that at all. Because the key here is that we want to understand what the browser provides by default, what screen reader expects of it, what keyboard can do with these browser defaults, and then enhance it. Do not ever replace the keyboard shortcuts. So let's say when you try to print something, right, you go Command P to print or Control P to print. You do not want to design your app and override that command to turn Control P into search instead. You want to make sure that you don't, you either create a whole new set of keys to let user quickly navigate to things, or to leverage the existing thing and expand upon it. Never replace browser default keys, because if the user is not familiar with your product and they're using your keyboard to navigate for the first time, or for the when they're not familiar yet, by overriding browser default, you make them, you get lost. It's like someone else is asking you to use a tool that you're not familiar with to do the same task you always do every day. So it's only going to cause frustrations to a user if you override browser defaults. So being mindful of that is very important when you're designing for keyboard controls in mind. All right, let's play around a little bit more with RNZ.
Link. New Zealand. Link.
Cool.
World. Link. Politics. Pacific. Link.
Tiaumuri.
Sport. Link. Business.
Okay.
Link. You are currently on a link. To click this link, press Control, Option, Space. List 5 items. You are currently in a list. List 4 items. You are currently in a list.
Just then I tried navigating by quickly jumping to the next list possible, and then jumping to the next link possible. Anyway, so that's how we quickly use the screen reader to navigate through everything. There's browse mode, which is
Chrome has new window,
which just let the screen reader reads out whatever it's focused on at the time. You have the focus mode, which is when you use tab to control and to control where your focus state is and skip to the next available component. Then you have rotor, with or the shortcut keys that help you navigate via heading, links, form control. Now, with Mac, you notice that there's a huge big black box to show and signify where you're focused on or what your focus state is. But in a lot of other screen readers, that is not available. It assumes that you, as a designer or UI designer, have already have a very visible focus state, keyboard focus state available for you. So the screen will rely, if you're a sighted user who's using a keyboard to navigate your site, and using a screen reader, tools like NVDA doesn't come pre-shipped with these boxes. It's just assumed that you as a designer have designed a really well contrasted focus state. And so it's just going to trust you to do that. The problem is many websites doesn't have a focus state. Developers go and removed it, or designers felt, that ugly blue ring by default is not pretty. It asks developers to remove it. That is bad. That is really bad for keyboard users because they don't know where they are on the screen anymore, especially when you're sighted. So please don't do that. If you're going to remove or replace a focus state with some sort of styled thing to go with your branding, make sure it is high contrast and completely accessible, and that it's very clear and obvious that it is a thing you're focusing on. All right, I'm going to quit the screen reader, and you could do that by doing Command F5, or I could just use my mouse to actually, get out this thing.
VoiceOver off.
All right, so we have now finished with the VoiceOver, and we've gone through the screen reader. Let's actually have a look at the takeaways. So after all that demo, takeaway number 1 is please do content first design. It solves so many UX problems because you already thought of how a linear text-only experience would look like or would sound like from your content. If you're making a to-do app, sure, there's visuals everywhere, but how should that sound, or how should we code it? The content first design really helps with that information. Then I'd also want you to consider keyboard only navigation. If mouse is a secondary thing, if keyboard is the only way to navigate your web app, how should a user be able to navigate it? In what order? And that kind of detail would greatly help ensure that your app or your designs gets implemented in the most accessible way possible. Takeaway number 2, and the last one, is learning to use a screen reader does not replace testing with real users. Now, as UXers, you're probably already aware that no matter how much you as a specialist who try to design for the best or the most usable experience in your idea, testing with real users is always way more valuable. Or you at least need to validate with some users, right? That what you think is easy actually is easy for the user, or is actually what the users want. It's especially crucial for when you're designing things for users who might use a screen reader or have access needs, to actually test with them, because I'm not as fluent as using a screen reader as they are. I don't have the speaking rate to like 100, speak very fast and understand all the keys and remember all the shortcuts off by heart. I'm not a real user of a screen reader. I'm only just learning how to use a screen reader. So in order for me to validate and check if my designs, if my keyboard adjustments or other efficiency thing, or the skip link, or where the skip link plays to, if all those things that I've designed with a screen reader and keyboard users in mind, if I want to know whether that truly is helpful, I need to test with real users. And even better yet, I hope that we would be able to actually work with users who use assistive text, because you can't ignore what your colleagues, like you can't be designing things on a day-to-day basis and then have your colleagues who can't use it, right? By you working with someone with access needs and perhaps use a tool like a screen reader, you get validation, or not validation, but you get someone to test that up front before it gets to the real user, or before you go and recruit someone. You then start to think about these things more often and bake it as a part of your process. So on top of designing with content first, which you should be doing anyway to really enable universal design, and testing with keyboard testing in mind, by hopefully designing with a colleague who have access needs, and also testing with users with access needs, the real users who use these tools on a day-to-day basis, you will get a much better idea as to how people are using your app and how to best optimize for those use cases. So after all that, that is how to use a screen reader. Now, I want to, encourage all of you to go and explore a bit more. Apple has a really good list of videos that show step by step how to use OSX VoiceOver or how to use your phone's iOS VoiceOver. It's actually fascinating to use iOS VoiceOver because that's by touch. You can't see, right? So you have to use all the commands. We might do another session on that later on. It's fascinating. But for now, we're sticking with the desktop screen reader. But I would welcome you to be more aware of the access needs users. And by being more aware and understand how people are navigating through your site, you're, I guess, like more equipped to cater for more variety of users, the diverse needs, the one who use only keyboard, the ones who might have ADHD or other neurodiverse conditions. Or, by coding things correctly, by being explicit about what your content should sound like, it helps machine like IA, Alexa, all these other tools to be able to access your content and up your SEO, like ranking, or let people use voice to navigate through your content. It just opens so much more possibilities for people to be able to access and use your products. And that comes for free by just being inclusive to start with. And yeah, that is it. Thank you.
Wow, Prae, thank you. Hey, everybody, give it up for Prae with little emojis and whatnot. Wow, Prae, I think I'm not the only one that learned a lot from your demonstration today. I was thinking of a few things of what you were saying along the way about particularly about content. I'm just going to delve right in that because back in the day, a designer, UX designer, would make a sitemap, right? Or they would make a content inventory, which I know when I moved here to New Zealand, that seemed pretty weird. I remember at the place we used to work with, when we worked on tourism, one of the first things I had done was make a content inventory and list everything in a hierarchy. And I do remember quite a few people going, huh? What is that? But it definitely reminds me, especially in some of the example you were showing, why it's important to show the relationship between pages, their parent, the parent page and the child page, and how they work together, and also how you name things, so that it shows up within the reader in a way that is easy to comprehend. And there were all these little tricks. I remember even naming a page. I don't know how many times I've named a page and it's like, why are you naming the page? And I go, because that's how my inventory is and why that's really important to show that difference. And just there are these tricks you learn from doing the work that you never think about until you see something like this where that makes a lot more sense why I would name a page. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But there's quite a few questions going on throughout. So if you want, I will get going with that. Just put your questions in there. I'm going to just dig around in a couple of them. Get going with. I think one I want to talk about is something that a young this is a person who's starting out his design career named Steven UX. And there's a lot of comments in the channel about that, but is there usually a specialized UX designer for just accessibility? And I think one of the best answers I saw was, I'm not from Dallin Fremantle. Great name, by the way. I like it. I'm not sure about other companies, but we have accessibility reps in each stage of the development process and discussing accessibility during each stage. So I was wondering if you knew anything about this, accessibility reps.
Yeah, I think so. In my heart of heart, in the ideal world, is that accessibility is a part of the design and a part of development. We should just do it. It's like testing your code. You should test your code. You should test your design. But in reality, that is so new to a lot of people, right? That's not taught in school or universities. And that results in the need to start educating delivery teams how to perhaps embed accessibility. And that then leads to perhaps having a rep inside each product domain or in each department or in each team to start helping coaching other people within the team to start thinking about accessibility. That is one way to do it. There's also other companies who have a dedicated accessibility team who acts like a consultant. So everyone else comes with accessibility questions and they help find answers, so help you do audits and things like that. So what Dallin was saying is just different ways to spread knowledge and information.
Fair enough. Alrighty. Um, cool. So I want to get to some of that. There's some very nerdy questions, and I love
Ooh.
them. Thank you. This is by our friend Walt.
Oh dear.
I'll start with the nice one. He goes, "How would you help less experienced front-end devs transition away from making everything a div?"
So that's a story of my life right now. And unfortunately, front-end developers are not very valued in New Zealand. Either we value full stack, and so they're mostly back-end who learn a bit front-end and hence, don't care about semantic markup and all that stuff. And there are multiple ways to do this, but I feel like the ways that is most impactful is actually to just run your app through a screen reader in front of them. Okay, here's what you've coded, and here's how it sounded. And perhaps use a good example of Radio NZ or digital.gov.nz website to go, here's what it should kind of sound like. By having that comparison, we can then start talking about, okay, and this is done via semantic HTML. And that's very simple, right? Replace div with H1, H2, H3. And it's not like you're changing the whole development life cycle to enable these things. It's actually low-hanging fruit. So as you're showing, here's how our sites sound like, here's the ideal state, and here's like a really quick wins in how you do it. I think that's probably the most efficient way to.
Can I add to that from a designer point of view? One of the things that I do when I work with a developer and I'm creating something in Figma, and you guys all know I like Figma, I set everything kind of in a semantic way. Like I will call a title or a subheadline. I might put out as part of the hierarchy H1, H2, all those things. Because on that transition into the CSS, when you work with a developer, they will at least see how I named it, right? And I think it's important if you're kind of that technical designer where you are working with a front end dev or a full stack engineer, you're going to have to own that space. As I think Prae has kind of clearly identified, is they may not be aware, they may have other things going on. So you're going to have to do that. And you have to train yourself to be that precisive and follow things that make sense in a CSS world, right? Do H1 to H6, call things copy text, give us a heading, a subheading. You need to learn to design that in your work so that when you pass that off, you at least addressed it in a way that I think is addressing the needs of these people. And it's also just better design foo, in my opinion. So thank you. Thank you, Walt. Another one that Walt put up there, because I think it's also really good, is and I think a few people have kind of asked something about how do you convince your business to invest more in accessibility, blah, 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 blah. A lot of devs don't want to mess with the ARIA tags. So what do you have to say about that?
So that's sneaky, Walt, because there's two questions in there. The first one is investment, and the second one is kind of like a misconception that accessibility is hard from coding perspective. You have to rework
Welcome
the
to Walt.
Yeah, all right. It's that profile picture says it all. Sneaky. Okay, so the first one, right? How to convince the business. I've been conflicted about this for the past 2 years that I've been trying to like get people interested in it, because you can't track, like I said before, right? You can't track how many people use the screen reader on your site. You just can't, because software trying to access another software, it's not aware of each other, or it's not required to be aware of each other. So you can't really use the stats as to how many people use your website. And it's so easy for business to just say that, oh, we don't have disabled people using our site. I mean, that line makes me so angry, but
I've lived through that in my early career when, if I could just stop, I'm sorry. In my early career, I actually worked for an insurance company as part of the enterprise, and I found somebody who used screen readers. It was an actual lawyer in the company. And I said, can I meet with this person? Can I walk them through and things like that? And the comment that I got from the business was, we don't have blind people who read our site. I mean, that was kind of the harshness of why I shouldn't do that, but I did it anyway, and it was a good experience. Anyway, back to you, what you were saying.
no, but that's kind of you're leading on to my actual answer, right? I'm just saying, like, just do it. Like, the business is not going to ask you, you should design responsive design first, or the business is not going to dictate how you as a designer do your work. Actually, it's a really bad business if it's telling you how you should be doing your work, right? And so if you just design accessibility in mind, at least you've done your bit. It's gonna, of course, like there's as much as I would like everyone to be an advocate and go out there and convince their business to do this, it's really hard to get stats for the case. The only stat you can use is that 1 in 5 New Zealanders have disability. But it's not going to break down further into how many of them are blind, how many of them are registered, all that stuff, right? So you don't have the numbers to back you up. And that's what like the business usually asks for. Well, how many people? What's the number? What's the benefit? Where for us as practitioners or people who create product, if you're starting from universal design concepts, content first anyway, as a part of your workflow, you've done what you can to make that accessible. And then, of course, like the next problem would be how to get it to implement accessibly. But then that's a problem of communication handover. If you're not descriptive about your handover, like if you like what Nani did, right? If you actually label something as an H1, this is a list, this is a block of really hit content, and if it's not coded accordingly, that's failure in the process. That's not business failure. And so the best way to do it is to make sure your work is accessible, design with accessibility in mind, and then work with your team on the process to enable that to happen. And that's what I'm doing my current team now. The business is not going to say you must do or meet this A standard, double A standard. At this point, I don't care. What I care about is my team or people in my realm of influence are doing the best they can within the knowledge that they have right now. And all we can do is just chip away at it, right? Talk about like tomorrow we talk about like screen reader. The next day we talk about like neurodivergent users. Like we could start introducing topics. I mean, most teams that I know of on good product companies would have like, brown bag lunch and learn sessions or a quick catch up or retro. There's so many opportunities to bring these topics up in small chunk ways to enhance the way we work. So that's question one. Now, like the sneaky question two is like the misconception that ARIA makes things accessible, where it's not true. It's H1, H2, H3. It is the name, like calling things a button instead of a div, making sure link is a link, takes you to the next page. Those are not scary at all, right? You can't really
It's called
go wrong with
using
that.
your language. Yeah, using language that makes sense. Yeah,
Yep.
it's one of the things you had pointed out, with the don't change the defaults. To me, these are default language words, right? It's at this time you should not be ignoring them. You should be thinking in that way as you design. But it's also with the research. I will say some of the things that I always do, I think is a little old fashioned. Like I make a content inventory. I make a spreadsheet that's just full of the IA because it helps, particular in this, to be able to do that. Just do it is what I say, and I don't think it's wrong. And to use the right language that everybody else is using, because that's the main code of how these different technologies are accessing those ideas for these other individuals. One thing to point out too, and this was something I did talk to with Prae about this topic, is you all are getting older. Okay, your eyes will change. You are gonna sometimes not see things as well. Start now while you're young to get this going instead of, all of a sudden you're in your middle ages and going, I can't read the browser, or I can't do those things. It just becomes, I think, a normal to think on that manner. We're all getting older. We're all going to suffer from these things. That's just how it is. So let's start solving it now and making it just part of how we do our work.
I mean, the reason I've told Nani and a few people this before, and it's on record now, so there we go. But
There we go.
like, I've told a few people this before, like I'm not in accessibility because I have a disability right now, or that I'm like such a kind-hearted person that I, like cry myself to sleep and care about everyone with disabilities, right? I'm not that altruistic a person, but who I am is that I know I'm going to get older. If I'm going to buy a house or an apartment, I want to make sure it's wide enough for my wheelchair if I need to hop into it, that that's websites that I want to use, like accounting software or a legal document, is accessible to me when I no longer have all my faculties or all of my functions in my body. It's just insurance. It's designing. I think of it as designing for your future self.
Yeah. Yeah, that's it. That's exactly it. That's great. All right. Moving on to this is just something I wrote about information architecture is important, but I was wondering how can we name things better for collaboration with developer for doing a heading for a screen reader.
How do we name things better for collaboration?
I mean, I know to stick to certain things, but for that heading, is it just heading? Is it just header? I don't know.
I think so. The easiest accessible design I've ever worked with came to me first, like the first version came to me as a Google Doc, and it uses Google Docs heading 1, 2, 3, 4. Because again, the visual information is separate. Like, because when developers are new to coding accessibly, having a visual layer as well information layer, sort of like as the only artifact to hand over, is really hard for them to separate that. They start coding the styles to match whatever's on the design, regardless of what labeling or information you have. So if you don't want to go through all your designs and label them separately, if you've started with content and just like write them down in like that linear Google Docs format, that's already like a really good handover artifact to specify what are the structure of the page.
Okay, cool. Thank you. Let's see what other things we have here. Oh, I think Jeff put something in there, but I think you just answered that. By seeing so many level 2 and 3 headers, I think this was when you were showing us the WC3. Yep. This makes me realize how many headings surely increase cognitive load as screen reader users try to keep in short-term memory what was H2 label was way back then.
This is interesting, right? Because depends on what type of page you have. Because the reason why you have a page with a title and a heading is that the content in that thing should be related to that content. If you have a lot of headings, I'm not saying it's harmful, because again, if you can't see, those headings won't be will just be a way for you to quickly browse or scan. You don't have to retain that information. You need to know loosely what this page is about. But if there are so many subtopics within the page, perhaps that is a sign that you should start breaking that topic into small other pages. I mean, the web is flexible. There's no need you need to put everything about your business, about me, and contact details and stuff in one page. Surely they can be split out as well. And for people with, like, even if they don't use a screen reader, people with cognitive disabilities, keeping things simple, contained, short, concise, easy to read is going to benefit them too, or people new to accessing information or learning things. So I'm not saying lots of heading is bad. Having headings is better than having no headings, but better yet, make sure that everything is related in the theme of that page title.
Cool. Thank you. I think this is probably something everybody would like to know, if there's a good cheat sheet listing for all keyboard shortcuts that are already taken if you need to create your own shortcuts.
You mean what the browser can do? There is, and so there's two types of keyboard shortcuts, right? One is the screen reader specific shortcuts, and one is perhaps ways to tab and navigate using keyboard with plain HTML. And the list of what you could do with HTML element is only just literally like tab, space, enter, and arrow key. Those are it. And then on top of that, what the browser is capable of is, Control P, Control S, Control. Those are the keys you're already familiar, and there's not many of them. So that's what you're talking about, like the HTML thing itself. Now with the screen reader shortcuts, the Mac one is really hard for you to try to encode an additional thing, because I had to use Command Option and then A, or Command Option P, Command Option U, to like do those things. With Windows, it might be slightly different. So there are sheets for screen readers specifically, but there shouldn't need to be one for HTML, because again, it's tab, enter, space, arrow keys for HTML. Perhaps end and home, but then but as long as you don't override those defaults, those are good. So yes, I can send you the sheets for the commands for OSX VoiceOver, NVDA, and JAWS. But it's really unlikely that you're going to be overriding those unless you're doing funky things with your app.
Right. He did follow up, but I think you're right about that. That you just start with what's already known. I would say go to the web standards on accessibility as a good starting place for finding that information out. I think, yeah, I think we may be done with all those questions, to tell you the truth. I mean, it's getting kind of late.
There's one more that someone asked about, like using ARIAs, like that ARIA is not enough. Like what I find is that I need to use ARIA when the designer gave me a design that extends beyond what browser is capable of, or by default, like default selection. So instead of using select box, the designer wants to style it differently, and so we need to fake a select box and fake all the functionality that select box natively have. That's when you have to use ARIA. So if possible, keep your design simples, and then you don't have to do all these faking and learning ARIA. But as soon as you create a custom component that needs those other things, this is where you should be like, yes, developer would need to start learning the ARIA roles. This is where you should be testing with real assistive tech user. That's just a different hurdle, but it's you, designer, who designed that, right? You're responsible for creating an extra load on the development workflow and testing workflow. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it. I'm saying that if you do that, it's an informed decision that you're increasing the scope of the work.
All right, cool. Thank you for that. Here's the link for standard guidelines for ARIA I know that I don't know much about it as well, so I got it for myself, and I hope you look for it as well. Um, but I think one thing you should see, designers, it's really clear that you have um, a lot on your plate to understand if you do your side well, if you think about this in your designs, that as you do that handover and that collaboration with your developer, you're at least addressing some things, right? I mean, like I can't say it's 100%, but at least it's not a 0%, right? So it's something to think about. How do you put that into the process of designing your solution? It's much different than trying to think of your concept. But when you start making that product a thing that you're in a sprint working on it with developers, put that as part of the process. Put that on on the backlog. Make it a story in the backlog that everybody understands how important that is and why you need to do that work, so that it's not unusual when you hand it over, like, what is this? Like, make sure everybody starts having those conversations up front, why it's important to do. Um, um, and I think you have that power as a contributor, as a person who does the work, to just make sure it's on the backlog. Okay, so let's just do that. Cool. Alrighty then. I think, if you look through any more questions, I think I got most of the ones that weren't really comments between each other, but I'll take a look one more time. With that said, I think we're coming to the end of this. Pray, I don't know how long you want to stay and talk more on our Discord about this. But I will say, if people want to talk maybe for the next 10 or 15 minutes with Prae, actually voice to voice, just jump into our Discord to do that. It's just a Investment Friday area, and we could just sit there and talk. And it's like talking like any normal uh, meeting. You just have to set that up. But if we won't be there long, like just a few minutes, just in case you want to. And if nobody shows up or whatnot, we're just going to be done. But other than that, Pray, thank you so much for sharing all your information and all your mana there, because that was some cool, interesting stuff. And I know I wasn't the only one who learned a lot of new things. And I really thank you for all of that.
Oh, thank you for having me, and thanks all for dialing in. I'll see you on Discord.
Alrighty. All right, guys. Thank you. Bye.